Welcome back to Context. With this special episode, we are returning to the OG of the show, episode 1. Rich Shayewitz, director of basketball at Sonoma State University. 75 episodes later, let's come back and see where we are. Coach, thanks for jumping on this Sunday evening, 7 p.m.
Well, thanks for having me, man. It's exciting. I feel honored to be back and see how your podcast has taken off, and it's awesome to circle back. And I think I'm pretty sure I've listened to 74 of them. So
I love it. And for those that are listening for the first time, go back and check out episode 1, which is, depending on the week, the highest downloaded episode or the second highest downloaded episode on the show. So the first time that Rich was here, he was dropping great wisdom and knowledge that people seem to have enjoyed and continue to listen to. So with that said, let's do this, Rich. Catch us up on your current situation in regard to what it is you are juggling, because as people who have listened to the previous episode will be aware, but people that aren't may think, hey, you're just coming on here as a college basketball coach. But there's a little bit more to what you're doing there, isn't there?
yeah. So I just we're at the end of the college basketball season in Division II, and this year I served as the director of basketball at Sonoma State, and I was the head coach of both the men's and women's basketball teams. It has been a long year in regards to just time and brain power and being on the road and doing 2 jobs every day. So it's definitely been a haul. Feel fortunate to we are in a situation where our women's team is still playing, where we qualified for our conference tournament starting next week, and our men's team have finished the season and will not qualify for playoffs as we look to rebuild that program here at school. It's definitely been a challenge, and there's been a lot of challenges, not only as far as just time and one person coaching 2 basketball teams. Obviously, the global pandemic has thrown some wrinkles in our daily operations. As simple as I can put it, we hadn't played with our full team. The last time we played with our full team was December 10th, and we didn't get our full team back until maybe 3 weeks ago.
Well, not only that, let's go a little bit deeper here into setting the context up for this episode. You were named the director of basketball right before the pandemic, correct?
Yes.
And so you had to try to take on a new team as you were coaching the women at that time during remote instruction, when you couldn't be around your team, and still try to keep a team together and prepare for a season that you didn't know would ever come. So talk briefly about that as a backgrounding piece, so that when we start talking about some of the challenges you have faced, people will have a little bit of a better idea of what you were dealing with.
Sure. Well, as it went, the coach that I played for and worked for all those years on the men's side, he retired right before the pandemic hit. The conference was the first conference in the country in any division to decide that we were during the 2021 year, that we were not going to play a non-conference schedule. So they had decided to play only a conference schedule in the CCAA. And in the CCAA, for those of you that don't know, we play back to back. The women's game is played before the men's game. So when the athletic directors had asked me to take on both programs, they had it in mind that it was only going to be a conference only schedule, and it would be feasible since we all travel together anyway. That's, like you said, Justin, that season ended up not happening. The 2021 season ended up getting canceled for the CCAA. And so I spent a ton of time basically meeting the men's team, the team I just started coaching, meeting them on Zoom and trying to build relationships virtually. And it wasn't until I want to say maybe the last 5 weeks of the semester in the spring of 2021 that we were allowed to come on campus and have a little bit of a mini training camp and just get the guys in the gym. And so that was outside of me meeting them as not their coach prior. That was the first time me meeting them as their coach.
Yeah. And in addition to that, you were also coaching the women at the same time. So not only were you having those conversations, you were doing it times two.
Absolutely. Everything was times two: recruiting, virtual recruiting. And I'm sure all the college coaches know this: virtual recruiting, signing players you hadn't seen and play in person, lots of film, lots of trust of people that virtual visits, virtual study hall, virtual academic meetings, you name it. As many are virtually burned out, we were trying to do as much stuff as we could to keep them engaged and keep them going. And the hardest part, I think, for me at that time where the season was canceled, is that I really never had any good news for them. Mm-hmm. That either program, the men's and women's program, I had no good news for them ever, other than until they started talking about us coming back to campus and possibly getting 3 or 4 weeks of work in. Mm-hmm. So, trying to conjure up things for them to do, try to do some team building stuff, trying to have them get to know me, and as well as me get to know them on the men's side. And then on the women's side, even though I had a big group of returning players, there were still new players that had never met me until they stepped on foot for the first time. Even though you feel like you have a relationship with them over the Zoom or over the phone, it's still not the same until you meet them.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I think the fact that you were able to keep both of those programs running is a testament to your commitment and work that you've done over the years to position yourself for that. So kudos in the way in which it can be received during this time, especially after a tough season, juggling that. Here's what I would like to know. What did you implement during the virtual phase that you held on to during the live phase that you think would benefit others?
That's a great question. Well, I think we have the women's team going. I think I hit the ground running, trying to continue what we've had already done with the women's program, and just try to duplicate it with the men's program coming in as a new coach. And with that being said, I think first and foremost was just communication and how we communicate. Mm-hmm. And I think from there, it kind of rolled on to making sure that if we're going to do a Zoom meeting, everyone's got to turn their camera on. Everyone's got to be on time. You can't have your hood on. You can't be, put some time aside as if we were actually there in a real team meeting, in our virtual meeting, and dedicate the time to sit there and get to know your teammates, talk with your teammates, or participate in the activity that we were doing. And the activities were simply, create an activity that the team can do. We would partner them up and have them create an activity that we could do virtually. More than anything, it was just communication exercise and something that had them being able to talk with each other, talk to each other, and get a chance for me to hear what they're interested in and what makes them tick. I think as we carry over into the live segment, I think those things just carried over. It just didn't end up being on Zoom. Mm-hmm. So, we'll continue to do team building stuff, whether it be Team Jeopardy or win, lose, or draw, type things that you were able to do on virtually, and you carry them over. I think the hardest part is that, because you coach, is that this is such a relationship thing, and communication is so important, that the face-to-face communication it was what they were missing so much. So once we got back together, they were done with trying to do any kind of virtual communication or virtual game or anything like that. They were over it. And when we got back to school, they were doing virtual class. So the last thing they wanted to do was do any more virtual basketball activity. So I can't say that we carried over a lot of the physical things that we had done on while in that virtual space, but I think the principles of our program were laid down during that time.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. They wouldn't want to be on camera any more than they needed to, considering what the world has been through the last couple of years. And I think you're going to hear that echoed across any sample size that we try to grab. But it was more about, and you already touched on this, the themes of here's what we were trying to accomplish during that time. And when we moved to live, being around one another, how were we able to use that momentum that we had created? What was the hardest thing that you faced once you were back on the court with either of the teams after a year away?
The hardest thing was, well, first off, I think one of the hardest things was with the new players coming in is having them acclimate to me in a face-to-face sense and acclimate to their teammates, even though I felt like the team came in with a more comfortable feeling because they got to meet their teammates on Zoom. But I think just all in all, just truly getting to meet us and how we do things in such a fast forwarded time, right? We had 4 weeks and we're just trying to jam everything in. We're trying to do some basketball stuff, we're trying to do some team building stuff. We're trying to get them all on the same page. I think that was difficult. But I also think that what was really difficult was the teams only got half of me. And I think they felt that. And I think that I would leave practice. I would go to our men's practice or women's practice, whatever it was. And then they would leave the gym. I would go to the office, talk with my assistants, and then turn right back around and start again. And in a normal sense, we'd be in the office, 3 hours before practice, 3 hours after practice, and players come by, they hang out, they meet with us, they talk with us, they come in and shoot the breeze. And I think with me coaching 2 programs, not that my assistants weren't fantastic, but just that touch of something off the court was definitely missing. And every day me feeling that going, I just haven't had a chance to meet with them, or I haven't had a chance to just sit down and see what really keeps them going off the basketball court. And that actually carried over just into this year. And that was a big challenge of this year of the same thing of I'm in the gym 6 hours, and there's only so many hours in the day for me to have individual meetings, and just more than that, just casual meetings and casual time.
Right. Do you feel, because we don't know, that would have been, that you would have faced the same challenge if you were only coaching one team?
No, I don't feel that. I feel like that's the way my philosophy and the way I coach our team and run our team is a lot of stuff gets done in that casual time. Whether it's hey, how's school going? How's your sister doing? How's your family doing? And not that we couldn't ask those questions on the court, not that I didn't, but it just wasn't the same. And I felt that throughout the virtual year, throughout the year we didn't play, and throughout this year as well. And I felt that I just wasn't readily available for the casual drop-ins for any of our players.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And a lot of that stuff gets handled organically outside of your structured time. So in the van, in the office, when people drop by, when things happen where you're checking in with somebody that wasn't planned. And 1, COVID took that away because we weren't together. 2, you having to double up and run 2 different programs obviously impacted that. But I think that's a really good realization for people listening. It's like, yeah, you have X number of hours in the gym or on the field. And then the other time is actually where a lot of the team building gets done. We talked the other day, not you and I, but another coaching colleague of ours, about how much of being a head coach is actually coaching your sport, and how much of being a head coach is administrative and logistics and things that have nothing to do with basketball. Where would you place that percentage? And what are the things that you would advise others that where their attention needs to go after doing this for two teams at once?
Well, I think the on the court coaching is 10% of our real job. As much as we'd love it to be 90%, but I think it's 10% of our real job. And I think that, the team management is probably another 60% of our job. And then the other 30% is everything else, like administration and fundraising and just the paperwork, paper trail, red tape stuff that we all deal with when it comes to working for a university or a high school or whatever it is. But in regards to advice, I think the biggest thing that I was able to get out of this situation was I was able to get more assistant coaches. And in that, I was able to delegate more to them. And I have a hard time delegating. I know that's my biggest weakness. And, for me to let go of certain things and trusting my assistants to make decisions and giving them the opportunity to make those decisions, and then, dealing with if there were some ramifications to it, which usually there wasn't, but, you run the risk of possibly there is. But, having them help you as much as they can. And I think that really resonated with me as I'm bouncing back and forth from office to office. I have two offices. I have two assistants in each offices, and I'm walking out of one office and they're asking me questions as I have to walk to the other office to meet with another staff. And I turn around and say, hey, just make the decision. I trust your judgment. Whether it be something to do with travel or something to do with scheduling or something to do with just the day to day. And so, I think that is the biggest thing is being willing to delegate and accept what those decisions are, and you have to deal with them if you don't agree with them. And a lot of times what I spent our time doing early was trying to educate our assistant coaches on how I'm thinking about this and why I think this way, so that when you have to make a decision without me, you'll try to put yourself in my shoes. And, well, I understand you may do it this way, but just think about how I would do it before you make a decision. Just this morning, since we're leaving for the women's conference tournament on Thursday or on Wednesday, my assistant coach, we were talking about where we're going to practice. Are we going to practice at our place, or we're going to practice up there at the gym we're playing at? And the gym they're up there, where they're only offering us 55 minutes of practice. So we just got talking about it. I said, well, what would you do if if you were me? And we got talking about that, and we came to the conclusion, like I thought we should, of that we'll practice at home before we leave. And but I was just proud of the fact that we're at the point now where our assistants are thinking we're like-minded when we're thinking about those decisions.
Mm-hmm. How would you say your ability to delegate in a way that you are not normally wired to do so has allowed you to grow both as a leader and a staff colleague / whatever we want to put in there?
Well, I think that's the ultimate proving ground and training ground of your assistant coaches, that you have to delegate to them, to give them the opportunity to know what it feels like to be a decision maker, because assistant coaches usually are not decision makers. So giving them the opportunity to be a decision maker only preps them more, as they're moving on. We hope that our assistant coaches are all striving to become head coaches at some point in their career. So them having that experience of, hey, you know what, the head coach was away and we had to make these decisions, and this is what we did. there were times this year that I didn't go to games because I had to choose one team to go to. And so in those situations, they're on the road, they're doing their own thing. I'm coaching the other team. So I say, hey, I trust your decision. Just make sure we make decisions that are safe, and we'll live with what they are. So I think that's a vital part of, as a leader, of you're trying to develop leaders in your program, whether they be players or coaches, but developing your assistant coaches only makes your staff stronger. When it comes to what I learned is that is that I'm a big sweat the small stuff type of guy. But being able to delegate, see those decisions, live with what are the decisions that are made, praising them for making the decision, whether it was a decision I would make or didn't make, and then trekking on, rather than mulling over it, or being letting it hold us up of our progress.
Yeah, I noticed that myself over the last couple years, trying to figure out a way not just to delegate and not just to involve them in decision making, but to your point, almost stepping out of the way so they can coach, so they can lead. And, last night in our section championship game, there were multiple timeouts and quarter breaks or whatever, where I just kind of told TB, I'm like, you got him. And it's like, there's certain aspect of trust that has to be there. And I think that comes from giving away some of the things that you normally take on to them early, and instead of having to do it all yourself, so that when push comes to shove, they're able to step into that situation. And I think, to your point, it's like, how are you grooming them to be head coaches, right? How are you hiring your replacement, so to speak, right? And I always joke around, it's like, hey, if I wasn't here tomorrow, are we set up to still be successful? And Jim Collins talked about it years ago in Good to Great, right? Level 5 leadership is if you can remove yourself from the equation and things keep sailing.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think there's another level to it as well. Or layer, excuse me, is that when your team, whatever team you're coaching, can look at those staff members of yours, those assistant coaches, and understand that they are also making right decisions and making decisions for the good of the group. Now you have synergy throughout the program, where I've been in a situation early in my career where I wouldn't delegate, and everybody in the program looked at me for answers only. And like you said, if I wasn't there were no answers. And then whenever your assistants made a decision, the troops would be like, well, that's not the right decision. So the layer of building the trust for them and that group is so vital.
And I think, to that point, what you just said is, if you don't work with them on that piece, right? And not just being on the same page, but really putting them in front of the group as a co-expert, so to speak, right? Or even like this idea of, in football, you have coordinators, and in basketball, we usually don't do that, but giving people very specific roles in regards to, hey, this is his space. Talk to him, And it's like, I'm at the point in the middle of games where people will, coach, I'm ready to go. I'm like, talk to them. I'm not,
right.
Go talk to them. He'll put you in. Like, I'm not dealing with that. He's Southern.
That's right.
What would you say you have noticed during this time that is transferable between the men's and women's programs? And what would you say you have learned is not transferable between the men's and women's programs?
Well, I will say what's not transferable first, because it's pretty fresh in my mind, where I think, as we know, that we have to coach everybody differently, every player differently. And I've also noticed that in how I approach the game and how I coach the game, I need to coach our teams differently. And being able to come out of a, a practice or a game from one group and then switching gears and making sure that I'm in the right mind frame to coach the appropriate way for the other group. And that's not the intensity part, because the women and men can take the intensity and the standards. It's just the language, and I think it's the explanations, and I think, from my experience, the my women's basketball team is a little bit more literal when it comes to my instruction and what I want, versus when I coach our men's team, they're not as literal. They're more free flowing, and I can maybe say a little bit less and get the same result. But that may be a byproduct of how I coach them. Not that has anything to do with gender or anything like that. But that's something that I learned for both of them, for sure. When it comes to something that I can take, is that from men's and women's, is that for last 5 years being a women's coach, we've really honed in on team building, and then basketball. And coming from the men's game for so many years, we had never taken that approach. And after sitting back and even scaling back on the men's program of team building basketball, I realized that the men need it too. They do. And I think the youth, the way our youth are growing up nowadays, I think the males they're more sensitive. They want more information than when you and I were kids, Justin. So I think it's really important that we break down those walls, and we are willing to do all that team building, and sometimes all that the touchy-feely stuff that we may think is too macho to do. Something that you've talked about for years, that I don't know if you still do it, but if you hug in and out of practice, I mean, that's just that. And we do Appreciation Fridays, and my women have been doing Appreciation Fridays for every year I've had it. When I brought Appreciation Fridays to the men, the first 3 weeks was absolutely silent. No one appreciated their teammate. And it wasn't until I said, "How'd you get to school today?" Asking one of the guys. And he goes, well, Jake gave me a ride. Well, here's your chance. Jake, hey, I appreciate you taking me to school for the last 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
As simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, and now they're at the point where now when it's Friday and I forget that it's Appreciation Friday, they remind me that it's Appreciation Friday. Mm-hmm. So I think that's important. I think it's something that we overlook because of the stigma of being a male, just a male. So I think that crosses over.
100%. And if this year has taught me anything, it's the value of those small moments. And so the hugs before and after, our guys telling each other they love them. We had a kid, as we're loading into the vans to go to an away game this year, have a full-blown seizure in my driveway. And one of his teammates was driving the car as they pulled up to the house, and my assistant coach was holding his head in his lap for a half hour while this thing went on. And one of my other players called 911, organized everything. I'm coaching a middle school game at the time. So like our trainer's over there and Tyler's running over, and this whole thing that went down. And, then he spent a week in the ICU and, is back now with us. And like, he can't tell you enough how much he loves you and how appreciative he is, and everything that you would hope for that we teach our athletes and our kids and whoever we're around. It's like when those things happen, all of a sudden that foundation you've built that allows you to be vulnerable and deal with those moments shows how important it is. And so the idea of creating, especially with our young men, the opportunity for them to be vulnerable and for them to emote is super important. And another one for people listening, besides Appreciation Fridays, we do celebrations at the end of every game. I don't talk about the game, win or lose. It's just like, hey, a little quick wrap up, maybe 30 seconds. And then it's like, all right, celebrations. Then put their hand up and they celebrate somebody else in the room. And that'll go on where I have to cut it off now. That's it. One more. We got to get out of here. But I think those are important. And I thank you for sharing that, because I do feel that as coaches, that is an area that we often neglect. I think ignore is the wrong word. I think that we can often overemphasize the on the court stuff and de-emphasize the stuff that's off the court. Are there other areas that you feel you've made progress in this year that will take more precedence moving forward than, hey, we need 2 hours of on the court reps on closeouts?
I mean, for me, like I touched on earlier, I think it's not the on-court stuff. I think it's everything off the court. And I think that's where my time, where even I come home at, after a long day, that I feel that I haven't done a good job because I haven't spent enough off the court time with our players in anything they're doing. Just the other day, I took one of our players, she's been struggling, and I just took her for a walk around campus. And she came in and sat in my office. I go, let's get out of here. Let's go for a walk. And it wasn't until, maybe our half a lap in of the campus where she started loosening up and realized this is just a conversation. And so I think that has been the hardest part for me, and a part where that I need to focus on more and less in the gym. And we haven't practiced 2 hours since maybe January, but having more time with them, thinking cerebrally, in the IQ part of the game, situations, film, and just more of our team building stuff. We have a menu of team building things that we do, but because of COVID, we probably only got to half of them. Mm-hmm. And, I was bummed about that. And the players were, but the girls who know me, they keep asking questions. Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? And the guys just keep going along because every time I do something with them, it's new to them.
Yeah.
So they just don't know.
But they're not asking you, why aren't you running this play or that play? They want to know what the stuff is that's off the court. Interesting. Right. Let me pivot to this, because I think it's an interesting conundrum for all of us this year. You mentioned you haven't had your whole team since December 10th, I think you said. And we didn't play a game for 22 days in the middle of our season for a variety of reasons. What would you say you have learned about coaching, about process, about performance, that from this year, where you're missing players left and right? You might have games canceled. Whereas in previous years, here's your schedule, you know what to plan for. That has better prepared you for if and when we ever have a return to, hey, it's on December 12th. I know this game is coming.
I mean, hands down, Justin, less is more. Less is more by far. And the first day that we got hit with COVID, we got knocked down. We won a great game on a Thursday night, and Saturday morning comes in. We had a roster of 14 and down to 7. And an hour before the game, I'm putting in a 2-3 zone just to keep it simple, just so that we can save fouls. And girls are playing out of position, and realizing that, okay, tell me what we can do, what can we all do, and what can we do well. We come out of that walkthrough an hour before the game with man-to-man defense, which we hadn't played a minute of man-to-man defense up to that point, because we played matchup zone, a 2-3 zone, a makeshift 2-3 zone, and our simple motion offense. Okay, so for the next 2.5 weeks, it's less is more. Keep it simple, stupid, right? It's just work on, the simple things of your basic fundamentals and go from there. As coaches, I think you might have said this to me. I think I've been using this since you said it to me, that if I, or maybe it wasn't, maybe it was my other friend Justin's, where it's, if you're putting plays in, the more plays you put in, the more plays you call. And, I'm anti that. I'm trying to not do that. And that's where we got to, where we're not calling plays, especially during a time when we have 7 kids.
Mhm.
I think another thing that I learned as well as our team learned is the belief, and how important the belief is in those times that we get knocked down to 7 players and 3 starters are out, in the belief in yourself and the belief in your system, and going back to your training and really just hammering home that we can do this. And we won. I mean, I want to say we won half our games with 7 players, and those were the most satisfying victories, as far as me as a coach for those players, is for them to come out and the looks on their face saying, okay, well, we're missing XYZ player, her, and her, or him, and him, and them go, well, next man up or next woman up, and let's play and let's go. And those were really satisfying nights for those players, and not for me because I think I'm a great coach, but just me as a leader of the program, of them feeling of their belief in what we're doing.
Mhm. No doubt. And yes, I did tell you that long time ago, and I got that from Yosh, when we were talking about how do you get people to fully buy into what you're trying to teach, and it's like, take away the crutches, right? Take away the support system where you can't bail them out. And ironically, the downside of that is when you play that free flowing and you try to install things, they're not great at running it. So we actually seem to get worse the more I try to coach in games. So, you just got to kind of live with stuff sometimes. In regards to time on task, I was just looking at something, and the last time we played a full season was in the 1920 school year, and we lost in the section semifinals then, but we had 55 practices that year at that time. And that's on the light end because we don't practice over Christmas or Thanksgiving like everyone else, right? So you add another 10 and you're up in the 60s or 70s. This year we have had 38. And we are entering the first round of the NorCals. And we're about half of the practices that most teams would have. I don't know if you've experienced something similar, but what I've figured out here, I think, is that we are having probably one of the best seasons we've had, and we practice about half the time. Is that just correlative, or is it causative, or what are your thoughts on the utility of the time we spend?
No, I don't think it's coincidence. I think that's exactly what's happening. I think that the young men and women that we coach nowadays don't have the attention span that to be in practice 2.5 hours, 2 hours every day and grind it out. And I think that we have to appease them a little bit more to who they are and what they are. And I think less practice, not less days of practice, less practice time, and more utilization of technology, of time off the court, is as valuable as it is spending 2 hours doing 4-on-4 shell drill. So I don't think that it's coincidence at all. I think it's that there's a formula that's important, that based on where your team is, that practice is overrated sometimes. And I'm a believer in that. I believe that once, my old mentor, Coach Fiscaldo, used to say, the turkey is already cooking, right? So there's nothing else we can do other than sharpen our knives so that when we cut it, it's good. So I think that it's a good opportunity for us as coaches to look back on our practice plan. I'm like you, right? We have 86 practice plans this year, and I'm going to go back and go, okay, well, we probably could have not used 20 of these, or at least 3 drills in each practice, to see, you know what, we wasted time here, we wasted time there. And typically in a typical year, I will go after practice, sit down with our practice planning and write notes on there to tell me, this was a good, this was not so good, we need to go back to this, or we just need to eliminate this didn't help us at all. And I haven't had a chance to this year with going practice to practice every day. But But yeah, I am a less is more guy. I want to be great at a few things and rather than average at everything. And I think the more practice, the more structured practice you do, um, it starts getting into it starts mucking up what you could be really be good at. I mean, so we practice. So since January, we practice for I put 90 minutes or 100 minutes on the clock, and whether we come out of the weight room or not, we're coming in and and just lots of shots, lots of offensive movements, and then we get into our practice and for 60 minutes, as long as they practice hard, we don't add more time, and that's it.
Can you, as efficiently as possible, unpack your journey to get to that point as a coach? Because I wouldn't say that's where you used to be.
No way. No, you and I have been friends for 25 years. You know the answer to that. I remember, as a matter of fact, I just pulled out one of my old coaching books and my resume, as and I'm giving it to a friend to kind of help out, for her to look at. And in there, in my coaching book is a practice plan. And the practice plan is, I won't get it. It's front and back. It's, dialed in to the minute. And there's gotta be, I want to say, between 16 and 25 drills on there in one practice. And I mean, just stupid, just like, this is crazy. We're not getting anything done. We're touching 5 minutes on anything, and that's it. And I think, as I became a head coach 5 years ago, and I think it was a blessing for me to have to become the women's basketball coach and really learn how to break down the game, how it needs to be, to where this now I'm at a point where less is more, simple, and let's teach the fundamentals and teach them how to play versus waste their time doing, this rotation, that rotation. We can just do that in a live situation. And I encourage my coaches, my assistant coaches, let's just coach them on the fly. Okay. Stop stopping practice. Right. We're wasting time. Let's coach them on the fly. Let's go. And I wasn't close to that before. I was stop I used to use the word freeze, and everybody had to freeze, and then we walk people through it. And I think there's value in that still, but it's the amount you do it.
Right.
And I think, yeah. And like I said, I'm far from that now, where our practice plan has probably, I would say, between 5 and 8 items on it. And if we don't get to something, it's not a big deal. We bring it up, we start with it the next day, and that's it.
Yeah, I think from a sanity standpoint for myself, getting to that point was very liberating. Sometimes you question whether or not you've prepared them as well as possible, and you wonder, well, I didn't have this or didn't have that. And at the end of the day, that's, I think, a lot of noise in your own head. But if you're not asking those questions, then you're not being diligent anyway. And at the end of the day, like you just said, that's not where you were. Not sure how you got there, but everybody's got to be authentic to where they are in order to find success. So I would love for you to wrap up with this, since I'm running out of time and I got to go be on duty and do the real job here.
Before you ask that, I do want to say this in regards to that, is that we have to look at our audience, right? And that's the most important part. And I learned that just the other day, one of my players was in my office, and I asked her if she watched movies. And she says, "No, I don't like to watch movies." I said, "That's interesting. Why?" And she says, "They're too long." And I said, "What do you mean they're too long?" And she says, "Yeah, I just can't watch a movie for an hour and a half or 2 hours." I go, "What do you like to watch?" She goes, "I like to watch shows like a half hour or 40 minutes. I go, "Oh, you can sit there for a half hour and 40 minutes?" And she shook her head and said, "No, I take breaks." And I said, "Wow, that's really interesting." So then I went home and I talked with my daughter, my 14-year-old daughter, and I asked her the same question. What do you do when you're watching a movie? Do you take breaks, or are they too long? And she says, "Yeah, I take breaks and I look at my phone." this and that. And it just went right back to the kids that we coach every day, Justin, is that the longer we talk and the more we muck up their brain, right, the less they carry, the less they retain. So that's the biggest thing. It doesn't matter what you and I think, it's what can they retain and how do they learn?
Yeah, and I don't even have a follow-up after that. That's a great place to stop and just a mic drop for people to think about, even as we prep for our game on Tuesday. How much attention can we put to things versus, hey, let's just get in here and stay loose and stay warm and stay ready. So I think that's a great place to stop. Appreciate you coming back on. 75 episodes later, lots more wisdom in this one for people if they're listening.
Thanks, buddy.